My twin brother had not been in touch for 8 years. Then, one night he called at 3 in the morning. His voice was shaking. "Brother, get me out of here." His own son had kept him chained in a shed for 4 years like a dog. I came, we traded places. And when that little punk came back, he had no idea who he was dealing with. Tell me in the comments whether there's someone in your life you lost because of pride, and whether you still regret it. Subscribe, because this story won't let you go. Let's begin. In the only photograph that survived all the way to the present, they were standing with their arms around each other on the bank of a pond. 2 7-year-old boys in identical washed-out t-shirts, so alike that their mothers sometimes mixed them up at dinner. "James, did you wash your hands before eating, my little neat freak?" "Mom, how many times do I have to tell you? I'm Mike." "Oh, really? Then why are you eating from his plate if you're Mike?" "Because his meatloaf slice was bigger. I only wanted to try it, and it turned out to taste better." James and Michael Miller were born 12 minutes apart in a county hospital outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in the summer of 1961. Until they were 9, they existed like one whole person, split into 2 bodies. Then, on a frozen neighborhood pond, a hockey puck flew into James's face and split the skin above his right eyebrow. The scar healed into a thin white line, and the world finally had a way to tell them apart. Though, truth be told, people could have told them apart even without the scar. James walked into every room first, talked louder, and got into fights before he had time to think. Michael stayed half a step behind and could stop his brother with one quiet sentence, even when James's fists were already clenched. It was an unspoken agreement, made long before they had the words for such things. And it shaped everything that happened afterward. In 1982, Michael married Margaret. James did not come to the wedding. They had fought over something so small that James later could not remember the reason, no matter how hard he tried. Margaret turned out to be more stubborn than both brothers combined. Every year, she sent a birthday card. No reproaches, no questions, just a few lines in her round handwriting. "James, happy birthday. We're doing well. Anna started 1st grade. Brian is growing fast. Maggie." He read the cards, put them in a desk drawer, did not answer, and hated himself for exactly 2 minutes. Then he found a way to forget until the next year. James left for Spokane, joined criminal investigations, and over 3 decades rose to the rank of lieutenant. Undercover work, surveillance that lasted for days. Interrogations where the most important thing was not asking the question, but holding the silence after the answer. All of it sank so deep into him that even after retirement, he still counted the exits in every room without thinking. The cards from Margaret stopped coming in March of 2017 because Margaret died. A stroke, fast, brutal, measured in days. James flew in for the funeral and sat in the last row of the church behind a column. After the service, he stepped outside and saw something no ordinary civilian would have noticed. Brian stood beside his father, not like a son, but like a guard. He intercepted every question directed at Michael, answered for him, and kept a hand on his shoulder so tightly that his fingers turned pale against the black suit jacket. James waited until Brian walked toward the car. Then he approached his brother and touched his elbow. "Mike, give me a minute before this whole place buries us along with Maggie. We need to talk." "Jim?" Michael blinked, and for 1 second his face became the same boyish, confused face from childhood. "You're alive. I didn't even believe it at first. When did you fly in? Why didn't you tell me?" "Morning flight. Got here just in time for the service. Listen to me carefully before your kid comes back. Your son Brian needs to be cut off right now. Keep him away from the house, the family business, and from you if you want to stay alive." Michael took a step back. Are you serious right now? Or did you develop some twisted sense of humor in old age? I picked a hell of a place for jokes, didn't I? Mike, look at me. Have I ever been the kind of man who does stand-up comedy in the middle of fresh graves? It's professional damage. I've seen more corpses than living people. Believe me, I'm not laughing. You know what you look like? You look like a man I haven't seen in exactly 8 years. 8 long years, Jim. You weren't there when Maggie was fading, when we dragged her through every hospital and every specialist, when she couldn't even get out of bed anymore. You just vanished. And now you show up at the cemetery and start opening my eyes about my own son. Brian carried that cross with me the whole time. Every second he was there. Where the hell were you? I'm guilty. I won't deny it. There's a special boiler waiting for me in hell for that. But my guilt doesn't cancel out the facts right in front of us. 30 years in investigations don't just disappear. Mike, I read people like him by the way they walk and hold their hands. Your son is turning into a first-rate jailer. The only problem is the prisoner he's guarding is you. Or maybe, Lieutenant, you see only what your own sick conscience wants you to see in his walk. It's much easier to invent a treacherous enemy inside your own family than to admit honestly that you abandoned us when we needed you most. James said nothing. His brother had hit the mark. Brian returned without a sound, as if he had never walked away. He stood beside his father, placed his palm on Michael's back, and looked at his uncle with a calm, measuring stare. Dad is having a hard time, to put it mildly, he said quietly. His whole world just collapsed. Let's not make a family scene here and tear him apart any more than he already is. You're a grown man, Lieutenant. I'm sure you understand. James waited 3 seconds. It was a habit beaten into him over decades. Give a man a chance to change his mind. Michael did not change his mind. He stood there with his shoulders lowered beside his son, and his eyes said one thing. Go. If you ever realize the noose is getting too tight, or if you just want to talk before the end, you know my number, James said. Call me anytime, day or night. Then he left. He flew back to Spokane that same evening. Brian moved fast. A week after the funeral, he took his father's phone, supposedly so nobody would bother him with calls while he was grieving. He changed the home number and cut off the internet. He told the neighbors, Dad is destroyed. He wants peace. The isolation grew by inches every day, invisible to the outside world. James called. The number did not answer. Then he called less often. Eventually, he convinced himself that his brother had the right not to want contact. A retired investigations lieutenant, trained to spot other people's lies, bought his own. He settled into a 2-bedroom apartment overlooking snow-covered rooftops, read crime novels, and walked the neighbor's dog. He thought about Michael less and less. He got used to it the way people get used to an aching tooth. It does not hurt if you stop touching it with your tongue. The night of May 4th, 2025, 3 in the morning, James was sitting in an armchair with an open book on his lap and a glass of bourbon on the armrest. His phone vibrated. Unknown number. His finger moved to decline the call and froze. He answered. There was ragged breathing on the line, then a whisper so soft, James pressed the phone to his ear with both hands. Brother, for God's sake, if you can hear me, get me out of here. I can't take it anymore. 8 years. The voice had grown duller, older, weaker, but the tone was the same. The boy hiding behind him on the neighborhood pond. Mike. James leaned forward so fast he nearly knocked over the bourbon. God, Mike, is that really you? Where are you calling from? Where are you? At the house. Well, near the house, in the old shed at the far edge of the backyard. Jim, can you hear me at all? Is the connection okay? I hear you. 4 years in here, like livestock locked up in a stall. Brian locked me in. He wants our land, all 40 acres, every last inch. They're planning to run a federal bypass through here now. Project of the decade. The property is worth crazy money. Jim, he's got a whole business plan worked out. He's pressuring me to sign a deed transfer. And the second I sign it, I'm gone. Stop panicking. Breathe. Dead men don't talk, and you're still alive, so we work. How much battery do you have left on that phone? Almost nothing. Lily slipped it to me, my little granddaughter. She found a moment and pushed it through a gap between the boards. She's only 9, can you believe that? Just a child. But somehow she figured it out. Mike, forget Lily for now. I need dry numbers. What exact percentage does the battery show? 17%. Good. Enough for operational contact. Now listen to me and don't waste oxygen on extra words. Do not sign any papers, even if they start slamming your fingers in doors. Do you hear me? Not one scribble. Not one cross. Play dumb. Say your right hand went numb. Say your head is spinning. Say dementia hit you. Say you need to think. Pray. Talk to the spirits of your ancestors, whatever nonsense comes to mind. But buy time. You need to hold out exactly 2 days. Memorize the rendezvous point, the gas station by the turnoff to the interstate. 4:30 in the morning on May 6th. Is it in your head? Yes. Carved into my skull. May 6th, 4:30 in the morning. Gas station by the turnoff. Jim, wait, don't hang up. What else? Say it fast before the signal drops. There was a pause. His brother's breathing quickened. He's running out of time. He wants to settle this right after his birthday, then finish me for good. He turns 40 on May 15th. He was whispering with his wife behind the wall a few days ago. Said it straight out. If the old man doesn't sign everything over before the party, then a week after the banquet, we solve this problem once and for all. James set the glass on the floor without looking. The book slid off his knees. They won't solve anything. They don't have the qualifications. I'll solve their housing problem, and I'll do it permanently. Mike, 2 days of silence. Did you hear me? I heard you, Jim. There was another pause, longer this time. Jim, I'm really scared. I want to live, even like this. That's the body's normal reactions to the prospect of an early burial. Everything is under control. I'm practically on the road already. You'll really come? Promise me. Mike, remember my biography. Have I ever lied to you about anything that mattered? A quiet, exhausted laugh came from the other end. Unexpected, strange, alive. There was that time on the pond when the puck split my eyebrow open, and you stood over me saying very authoritatively that it didn't hurt and it would be healed before my wedding. That was tactical misinformation, but since then, I stand by my word. 2 days, brother. Not 1 minute more. Hold on. I'll see you soon. Heavy footsteps sounded in the background. The call cut off. James sat in the chair for 10 seconds, maybe 15. Then he stood, opened the storage closet, and took an army backpack from the top shelf. It had not been touched in 3 years. A keychain-shaped camera with a 72-hour battery, a voice recorder, lock picks, a hunting knife, flash drives, $20,000 in cash wrapped with a rubber band, an old folder with photographs and copies of both twins' birth certificates. He checked every item, zipped the backpack shut, filled a thermos, threw the bag onto the back seat of his Toyota 4Runner, and pulled out at 4 in the morning, 2,600 miles. 2 days without stopping. The retired investigations lieutenant was going back to work. 2,600 miles collapsed into one continuous ribbon of asphalt, headlights, and thermos coffee. Spokane, Billings, Rapid City, Sioux Falls, Chicago. Cities flashed by on road signs, and James drove through each one without taking his foot off the gas. Somewhere outside Toledo, he stopped to fill the tank and buy a gas station burrito, which he ate standing up, burning his fingers. Michael's voice kept spinning in his head. 4 years in the shed. He had said it so matter-of-factly, as if he were talking about a leaky roof at the old house. At the Pennsylvania state line, James reached toward the backpack in the back seat and felt the handle of the hunting knife, not because he planned to cut anyone, because he needed to remember who he was. May 6th, 4:27 in the morning. The gas station by the interstate turnoff glowed like a yellow stain in the pre-dawn dark. James stood by the hood with an empty thermos in his hand when a figure emerged from the darkness, limping, bent over, wearing a torn plaid shirt and no shoes. Michael had walked 2.5 miles along gravel and wet grass. When Brian passed out drunk, he sometimes forgot to lock the padlock. James took 3 steps and wrapped his arms around his brother. Ribs pressed through the fabric. Michael collapsed into him with his full weight, and James held him up, the way he always had since they were 9 years old on that frozen pond. "Mike, sit down. Drink some water." Not all at once. Michael drank for a long time, greedily, choking. Then he grabbed the burrito James held out and began chewing, coughing as he swallowed. "Easy. Slow down. Nobody's taking it away from you. Breathe." "I thought you wouldn't come," Michael said, his voice wet and blurred. "I thought you'd hang up or change your number, or maybe I was already hallucinating. Come on. I'm too expensive for taxpayers to be a hallucination. You look like me, only whole." James crouched, took gauze from the first aid kit, and began wrapping his brother's feet. Scrapes, dried blood, dirt. "Jim, you were right back then, at the funeral, about Brian. I didn't listen. Stupid old fool. Mike, enough. Let me say it. I carried that rot inside me for 8 years. You warned me, and I dug my heels in. He's my son. My own blood. How could he?" Michael fell silent and dragged a hand over his face. "I'm an idiot, Jim, a complete one. Idiots don't live to old age. You're just a father. That says everything. Brains switch off. Blind love switches on." Michael made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Now listen to the plan," James said, tightening the bandage. "You and I are about to make a switch. I'm going into your luxury shed under your name. I'll play the obedient prisoner and collect evidence on that character. Video, audio, receipts, everything. Your job is to go to a hotel. Here are the keys. Here's $2,000 for expenses. Eat, sleep, and then put your face back in order. Once I have a full file, we'll make his life interesting through the law." "Jim, are you insane? He'll bury you out there." "Mike, I spent 30 years boxing up monsters next to whom your Brian is just a badly raised kindergartner. The people who seriously tried to bury me are either feeding worms or making license plates. So exhale. Everything is under control." Michael looked at him, and in those sunken eyes, with dark circles underneath, James saw the same boy from the pond. "When this is over, and you see Lily, tell her Uncle Jim came and he'll straighten everything out soon." He called a cab, slipped the driver $300 in cash, and helped his brother into the back seat. Michael looked back through the window, and James raised one hand, short and without drama. The car rolled away into the dawn. Changing clothes took 3 minutes. Michael's dirty shirt, pants caked with soil. James had not lost 45 pounds, so the clothes hung loose on him, but at dawn, with his face smeared and his back bent, it would do. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Michael stared back at him. He reached the house on the edge of the Pennsylvania town at 6 in the morning. The yard was overgrown with weeds. Beer cans sat on the porch. Inside, the television was blaring. Brian, nearly 285 pounds in a stained undershirt, stood in the kitchen with a mug. "So you came back," he said, looking his father over. "Where were we wandering?" "Just got as far as the fence," James answered in his brother's voice, quiet and squeezed. "My legs went numb. Needed to stretch." "He decided he needed to stretch," Brian repeated. "Try going out again without permission. You won't like what happens. Your health will run out real fast." Brian grabbed him by the elbow and dragged him through the yard to the shed. A padlock, a click. Inside, there was a mattress, a bottle, a bare light bulb, a bucket in the corner, and a small cast-iron stove with a warped chimney pipe. James drew in a breath. Sour, bitter, barely noticeable. Carbon monoxide. Not an explosion. Quiet, slow work. He turned on the keychain camera hanging around his neck and began filming the ventilation, the chimney pipe, and the lock. That evening, Lily came to the crack in the door. "Grandpa, it's me. I brought you some water." "Thank you, sweetheart. Just saving your grandpa. Can you bring it every day? But let's make it our little secret." "I know. I can do spy stuff. I'm 9, and I already know how to keep secrets." James pressed his forehead against the boards. The next day, they called him to dinner. Brian had a full plate of grilled steak. Heather, the dyed blonde with acrylic nails, had chicken wings. Linda Parker, Heather's mother, had pasta. Victoria, Heather's younger sister, ate delivery sushi without looking up from her phone. Lily had a cup of cheap instant noodles and ate slowly, making it last. In front of the place meant, for Michael sat a bowl of cold mush and a piece of bread with green edges. James walked to the table, calmly pulled out Brian's chair, sat in his place, moved Brian's plate toward himself, picked up Brian's fork, and cut off a piece of steak. He began chewing slowly and thoroughly. The room froze. Heather's fork clinked against her plate. Victoria looked up from her screen for the first time all evening. Brian jumped to his feet. The chair scraped across the floor with a shriek. "Have you lost your fear completely, old man?" James did not stand. He chewed and looked up from below. Brian took a step toward him, and something in his father's eyes stopped him. Not fear, not pleading, not submission. Something completely unfamiliar. Brian stepped back, sat in an empty chair, and said nothing. James finished every last bite, set the empty plate in front of his son, and said, "Pass the salt, please. The steak is a little bland." Nobody moved. He stood and went back to the shed. That night, through the wall, he heard Heather hissing at her husband in the kitchen. "Something's wrong with him. He's acting completely different. He gives me chills." "Stop making things up," Brian muttered. The hunger strike scrambled his brain. "Tomorrow I'll take him to Pierce. Let him sign the right report, and we'll close the subject." Dr. Harold Pierce, soft around the middle and nervous, began the exam in a patronizing tone, speaking to the patient as if to a child. "Well, now, my good man, let's check your memory. What year is it?" 2025, May 8th. Thursday. 57 degrees outside. Barometric pressure, a little over 29 inches of mercury. Perfect weather for not committing professional misconduct. Pierce blinked. "All right, now let's count backward from 100, subtracting 7. 100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58. Should I continue, or would you like to give me something harder? We can calculate the square root of 26, but your calculator might freeze." The doctor slowly set his pen down. Heather stepped into the hall to answer a call, and James leaned across the desk. "Harold, let's skip the circus. How much did this family pay you for the fake diagnosis?" "Sir, what are you talking about? I'm a professional. Give it up. Your little artwork with fraudulent chart entries from 2019 is a criminal case all by itself. The state medical board and the prosecutor's office will weep with joy when I hand it over." Pierce's cheek twitched. When Heather returned, he was sitting straight with his hands folded on the folder. "The patient is completely healthy," he announced in a wooden voice. "There are no cognitive disorders or abnormalities." Heather stared at him, but the doctor was already closing the folder and his fingers were trembling. 2 days later, the family left the house. Brian and Heather went to the farmer's market. Linda Parker went to a friend's place. Victoria drove into town. James opened the shed padlock in less than half a minute and entered the house through the unlocked back door. Brian's laptop was upstairs with no password. There was a folder of documents, a land appraisal for $3.2 million, correspondence with a surveyor, bank statements covering 8 years, systematic transfers of his father's retirement checks, a contract for a Florida condo, $450,000, closing date June 1st, and in the browser, sports betting sites and online casinos. Current balance, negative $120,000. He copied everything to a flash drive. Then he called Thomas Avery, an old attorney friend from Spokane. "Tom, hello. I've got work in your field. Unlawful imprisonment, abuse, and fraud on a major scale. The whole bouquet. I'll send the files tonight. Jim, for crying out loud. Can you at least stay out of crime stories in retirement? Another doomed case?" "Worse, Tom. It's a family case. And you know how those are. No prisoners." That night, he crept up to the summer kitchen. Brian was drinking vodka with Leonard Price, a county planning supervisor, and bragging drunkenly, loosely, and in detail. The land was worth $3.2 million. The county wanted it for the bypass. He would get the deed transfer at his birthday party. After that, he would fire up the old stove at night, make it look like the old man had tried to warm himself and died from fumes. Pierce would sign the report. Florida condo, new life. Leonard Price stood up from the table and left without finishing his drink. Brian stayed alone, raised his glass, and spoke into the empty air. "To Dad, then, however you slice it, he's a lot more useful to my business as a cold corpse than as a living man." James stood outside the window. The keychain camera was recording. In 30 years of investigations, he had heard confessions from killers and repeat offenders. But nothing prepares a man for a son raising a toast to his father's death like it is a business transaction. He sent the recording to Avery. The answer came 1 minute later, more than enough. Preparing the file, May 15th. In Victoria's room, Lily had whispered that her aunt hid papers there. James found a ready-made deed transfer. Grantor, Michael Richard Miller. Date, May 15th. And an envelope with $20,000 inside. Payment to push the document through an acquaintance in the county office. He photographed it, sent it to the attorney, stepped into the hall, and found Lily standing in front of him. Barefoot in her nightgown, she stood against the wall and looked up at him. "You're not Grandpa Mike," she said, not frightened, certain. "Wow. And how did you crack me?" "Grandpa's eyes are completely different. He always looks like he's about to cry. You look strict, and you're not scared of Dad at all when he yells. Grandpa shrinks right away." James knelt in front of her and pulled a photograph from his pocket. 2 boys by a pond. "All right, Sherlock, you win," James said. "I'm Uncle Jim, his twin brother. Look, this is us a long time ago. We were both 7. Lily studied the picture for a long time, moving her finger over the faces. "You came to save him?" "Yes, exactly. That's what I do. I get good people out of trouble." "Then I'll be quiet as a mouse." She pressed the photograph to her chest. "And Grandpa is coming back soon?" "Very soon," James said. "I promise this nightmare is over. Nobody in this house will dare make a sound when I'm done." The next morning, James left the house at dawn while everyone slept. He returned around noon behind the wheel of a white BMW X7, rented in town, wearing a charcoal suit, a pale blue shirt, and a Swiss watch on his wrist. He parked by the porch, stepped out, adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward the door. Linda Parker dropped her mug. Shards scattered across the tile. Victoria dropped her phone face down, and the kitchen filled with the unmistakable crunch of glass. Heather backed up and stepped into the cat's bowl. The cat shot into the air with a guttural howl and vanished behind a cabinet. Brian stood on the porch with a cigarette, and a column of ash fell to the floor. He did not notice. James walked past all of them without saying a word. "Hey," Brian finally forced out when his voice came back. "Where'd the money come from?" "From the nightstand." "You blocked the accounts but forgot to check my pockets. Hurts, doesn't it?" Brian opened his mouth, but there was nothing to say. The sentence was perfectly accurate. James went upstairs, entered Brian and Heather's bedroom, took off his shoes, lay down on top of the comforter, picked up a bright-covered book from the nightstand, and opened it to a random page. A romance novel with a half-naked man on horseback. A minute later, thunder rose behind the door. "Open up! Come on!" Brian hammered the door with his fist. "Have you lost your mind? This is our bedroom. Keep it down out there. Don't ruin the scene." James called back without looking up from the page. "Rodrigo is about to confess his love to Isabella. Don't throw off my rhythm. I'll take the door off its hinges. Go ahead, entertain yourself. But I'll deduct the repairs from your share of the inheritance, from the part you're never getting." The pounding went on for 10 minutes. Brian first, then Heather, then Linda Parker. Finally, the footsteps faded and the doors downstairs slammed. James put the book aside, closed his eyes, and smiled. That night, through the thin walls, he heard Heather hissing in the kitchen. "He's some kind of lunatic." "What, did somebody replace him?" Brian answered briefly. "We move the plan up tomorrow evening." On May 14th, the day before his birthday, Brian came to the shed with paper in his hand. "All right. Tomorrow at 3, you'll sign this in front of the guests. No tricks and no tears. Put on a smile, wave your hand, then roll back into your shed. Everyone will be happy." James took the pen, held it over the signature line, and looked up. His smile was empty, calm, and something in it made Brian turn to stone for a second. "I'll be right there," James promised calmly. "I'll sign everything. Don't worry." That night, he slipped into the party tent in the yard, connected his phone to the television, and tested the sound through the speaker. The video played perfectly. He erased the connection history and called Avery. "Tom, good to hear you. Tomorrow is the finale. I need your support team at 4:30. No delays. We'll handle it, Jim. You just be careful. Watch yourself. Come on." When have I ever watched myself? Too late to start now. On May 15th, exactly at 3 in the afternoon, the yard filled with guests. More than 60 people under the tent. Tables covered with appetizers. A speaker played something danceable. Brian took the microphone and gave a speech about his 40th birthday, his wonderful wife, his beautiful daughter, his loving father. Then he called his father onto the small stage and held out the deed transfer, presenting it as a touching gift from a father to his son on his milestone birthday. James stepped up, took the paper, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. Then he took the microphone from Brian with 2 gentle fingers, before Brian understood what was happening. "Dear guests, may I have your attention for a minute?" James said into the microphone, looking at 60 pairs of eyes. "Before we move on to this touching distribution of property, let's watch a little movie about the guest of honor, so everyone understands the scale of the celebration We've arranged here." He pressed a button on his phone. The television behind the stage came alive. Through the speaker, Brian's drunken voice poured across the whole yard. The land for $3.2 million. The bypass. The deed at the birthday party. The old stove with the damaged chimney. Dad was more profitable dead than alive. Then came the second video. Victoria counting cash and discussing how to push the contract through an acquaintance in the county office. 60 people stood silent. Someone dropped a glass. The silence was deafening. James straightened his back, squared his shoulders, and an entirely different man stood in front of the guests now. "Now let's take off the masks. I am not Michael Miller. My name is James Miller. I'm his twin brother and also a retired investigations lieutenant. I spent the last 10 days on a very entertaining vacation in that shed over there, collecting evidence on this close-knit family. Don't worry. Every copy is already with the authorities." Brian stood on the stage with his arms hanging at his sides. His face changed second by second, from confusion to horror. The gate opened. Michael entered the yard, thin, limping with a cane. Lily ran first, wrapped her arms around his waist, and buried her face in him. "Grandpa, that's it. We made it." Michael placed his hand gently on her head. "That's it. We fought our way through." The brothers stood facing each other, mirror images, despite the 45 pounds between them. "You made it after all," Michael whispered. "Where else would I go? Millers keep their word." Michael turned to his son. His voice was quiet, without anger, and that made it heavier. "Brian, you're my son. I raised you from diapers. I never spared a penny on you. I would have given you everything anyway. Why did you lock me in a cage?" "Because you and your principles were always in the way," Brian snapped. Michael flinched with his whole body, and James stepped closer, standing shoulder to shoulder with him, as they had stood their whole lives. The sirens came 1 minute later. Detective Captain Aaron Walsh read the charges. Unlawful imprisonment, abuse, fraud, attempted murder. The handcuffs clicked shut. Heather tried to run, but the garden hose treacherously wrapped itself around her leg. She fell, tried to get up, and immediately slipped on the wet grass, leaving one heel sticking out of the dirt. An officer walked over, bent down, and politely asked, "Would you like help getting up, or would you prefer to be detained in a horizontal position?" Heather only hissed something unintelligible. A second officer quietly remarked to his partner, "Most people don't get far when they start 5 steps from the gate, but this might be a new record for the shortest escape attempt." Meanwhile, Victoria was on her knees, sobbing loudly. During the search, however, 3 passports, a thick stack of cash, and a printout of flights to Mexico for the next morning tumbled dramatically out of her open purse. One of the officers picked up the paper, read it, and held it out. "So you weren't planning to run. You were just taking a vacation." "That's not mine," Victoria choked through tears. "Right. It jumped into your purse by itself." "Happens all the time," the officer muttered. Linda Parker was detained silently. She did not resist, but as they led her to the car, she turned to James and said with dignity, "I knew right away you weren't Michael." "Really?" James asked, surprised. "When did you figure it out?" "When you asked for salt." Michael never salted his food. James merely noted to himself that the only naturally observant person in that house had still chosen the side of the criminals. When they led Brian away in handcuffs, he turned sadly toward the tent and the remains of his birthday celebration. Colorful balloons, a huge cake, a banner that read, 40 years, only the beginning, he muttered under his breath. At least they could finish the cake. It's a shame to waste it. "Don't worry," the officer escorting him said. "They celebrate birthdays in prison too." just without the tent. The trial took place in August. James testified first. Brian's attorney claimed entrapment. "What? Entrapment?" "Counselor," James said, looking at the judge. "Entrapment is when you push someone into sin. I did not push him into stealing his father's retirement checks for 8 long years. I did not ask him to damage the chimney. And I certainly did not force this genius, Your Honor, to brag on camera about his murder plans. He handled that beautifully all by himself." Judge Martha Coleman overruled the objection. Lily testified in a closed session. She came out 40 minutes later with red eyes and silently gave her grandfather a thumbs up. The bailiff standing by the door could not help himself and gave a quiet clap. Judge Coleman shot him a stern look, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her and twitched. The sentence was delivered. Brian received 14 years in prison. Heather received 6. Linda Parker received 4. Victoria received 2 with parole eligibility. When they were led away, Brian turned and threw one last look at his father. Michael whispered one word: "Enough." In June, Anna, Michael's daughter, got in touch. She had been silent for 6 years out of fear. She hugged her father in the attorney's office and cried, "Dad, forgive me. I shouldn't have left. I should have stayed and fought for you," Anna said through tears. "Stop, sweetheart. You're here with me now," Michael answered softly. "That's what really matters." Lily recognized her right away. "Oh, I remember you. You bought me ice cream 100 years ago. I always begged for chocolate, but you stubbornly bought vanilla." "Because chocolate ended up on your new dress instantly," Anna said, laughing. "So what? It was just a dress. That was still the best ice cream in the world." Michael sold the land to the county for $3.4 million. The price had risen because of increased interest in the bypass project. He donated the house in Pennsylvania to a foundation that helped elderly people. There were too many ghosts in it to live there. In September, they moved to Spokane. Michael, Anna, and Lily moved into a house with a little front garden and a swing 15 minutes from James's apartment. Lily started 4th grade and signed up for gymnastics. Anna got a job at the city hospital. Michael learned how to live again. He read, walked, and gained almost 20 pounds. A cool Saturday morning in October, the brothers sat on the bank of the Spokane River with fishing rods, while Lily read on a blanket nearby. Anna was coming down the path with a thermos. Michael cast his line and stayed silent for a long time, watching the water. 8 years down the drain, he sighed at last. "But we're together again. Anna is close. Lily is all right. You know, I think we won that war after all. Your biggest victory was when you thought to call me in the middle of the night," James said, adjusting his bobber. I almost hung up. I sat there thinking, who am I calling? We hadn't spoken in 8 years. He'll tell me to go to hell. I'll be honest, I almost declined your call too. 3 in the morning, unknown number. I figured it was scammers trying to sell me a loan. Yeah, well, the Miller boys are hard to handle. Mike, nobody takes us with bare hands. Michael laughed quietly, but it was real, living laughter, and for 1 second James's throat tightened. Uncle Jim. Grandpa! Lily's clear voice flew over from the riverbank. Mom said we can get a dog. What kind exactly? James asked, squinting. A huge one, so it can protect all of us, Lily called back. James gently nudged Michael with his elbow. Listen, even the 9-year-old in this family thinks strategically. Exactly, Michael said with a smile. A real Miller dog then. Lily ran over and hugged her grandfather. James looked at the river, at the sun playing on the rippled water, and for the first time in many long months, he was not thinking about locks, recorders, or evidence. On that bank, there were 2 brothers, a daughter, a granddaughter, and a promise to get a dog. That was exactly what happiness needed to be. And if this story made you think about pride, family, betrayal, or the second chances we sometimes almost miss, tell me in the comments what you would have done in Michael's place, or whether you've ever had to forgive someone before it was too late. If the story moved you, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one.